All right, and welcome everybody to a special YouTube edition of the Functional Sportsaholic and Get Paid. I'm kind of combining these two podcasts for our return listeners. You know the drill. For anybody who's new that kind of stumbled on this page, basically Get Paid is a complete analytics-based and film-watching-based fantasy football podcast. So we do a lot of daily fantasy stuff, and we do a lot of fantasy football stuff. It supports my book, the Fantasy Football Almanac and Draft Guide, which is well-reviewed and well thought of on Amazon.com. If you want to check that out, go ahead and do so. Also, I want to let everybody know, if you're stumbling on this for the first time, go ahead and hit subscribe. We have a lot of really, really good fantasy football content coming out this season. We are going to have video-based shows. We are in the midst of building our Underdog TV studios, and we're going to be launching a lot of cool stuff coming out, so keep an eye out for that. So what I want to do right now is go into detail in preseason week 2 from a fantasy football perspective, what I think will happen, some of the confirmations, some of the surprises, and there were a number of both things. And I'm going to go game by game, and I'm also going to talk team by team for everybody as well. So let's buckle up and get started here. First game of the week here, Philadelphia versus Jacksonville. Philadelphia, there's no Wentz, so it's kind of hard to get a beat on what the offense is going to look like in the regular season. My big kind of question mark and hesitation is, Wentz. I was very high on him last year, coming off that injury. Last year, his numbers are really good, but he never really seemed to have that oomph that he had in 2017. So I don't know what we're going to see. I kind of have a feeling that he's going to be a little bit rusty to start the year, but I do think he's going to have a nice season. But the offense isn't really churning the way it should be. The good news is, hey, look, we've seen Philadelphia over the last couple of years. We know this offense is going to do well, so I'm not too concerned. From a fantasy point of view, though, I think there's two big questions, maybe three. First is at running back. It's Miles Sanders. It's Jordan Howard. What's going to happen there? I got to say, from watching the film, watching the first-teamers go against first-teamers, I like Miles Sanders. I think he's probably the most talented running back in the draft. The only thing is Philadelphia, from a play calling point of view, they're like the new version of New England. Remember how New England running backs, you could never figure out which one's going to be played? Well, New England, we kind of have a beat on them now. You have Michelle, running the early downs. You have James White catching passes. He's a PPR stud. And you have a new guy there, a Damian Harris, who's drafted earlier this year. He's going to be great. Well, in Philadelphia, you get kind of a mix of 4 running backs. Basically, Howard, he's been looking good too. He's going to play. Miles Sanders, I think he's the best of them. I think he'll probably out-touch everybody, but he's going to be given a lot away. I mean, this is going to be a big committee. You got Smallwood, you got Clement, Sproles is still there. You have a crowded backfield. It's going to be tough for any of these guys to really assert themselves. I think there's talent there, but remember, it's Philadelphia. They have a certain way of play calling. They have a certain, personnel grouping there. You just got to have to wait and see. The second question for Philadelphia is, what's Deshaun Jackson going to be like this year? I think he's going to be great. Alshon Jeffrey, I'm very high on him as an NFL player. He had a down year last year from a fantasy perspective. I think Philadelphia was a little, just purely from a fantasy point of view, you expected more from the stars and the studs. I think Alshon Jeffrey is good. He's going to be good, but because of Deshaun Jackson on the other side, I think it's going to open things up for Jeffrey. And on top of that, I think he's going to open things up for Deshaun Jackson. Deshaun Jackson, I saw last year in Tampa Bay. The dude can still run. I've watched Washington for a long time. He was good in Washington. He was good in Philly in his first stint. Philadelphia always seems to give him a little bit of extra juice. He likes playing there. He likes the fans there. He loves to perform on that field. I think he will be a factor, and I think he'll especially be a factor in daily fantasy this year. I think you're going to be able to get him early for a good budget. And in a fantasy point of view, look, he was running behind defenses last year. Fitzpatrick and Winston consistently missed him. And then by the end of the season, he had fallen out of favor with Dirk Cutter in Tampa Bay. I think he is going to be a factor in fantasy this year. So feel okay drafting him in the later rounds. And then the third question is Dallas Goedert versus Zach Ertz. Look, Ertz is going to play. Everybody knows that. But I think everybody's wondering how many snaps Ertz is going to take away, or Goddard's going to take away from Ertz. I don't see that many, frankly. Wentz likes Ertz. I think that's going to continue. Look, Goddard's going to get his stuff. He's going to get touchdowns, but he's not going to hurt Ertz's value to the point where you don't have to consider him, the second best or first best tight end, depending on who's on your board. Now let's move it to Jacksonville. What have we seen? Frankly, not much. Fournette, unlike last year, Jacksonville's not running Fournette into the ground in the preseason. That's good news, I think, for Jacksonville fans. The whole offense is going to be basically predicated on whether or not Nick Foles can extend more drives than Bortles did last year. I think it's a safe bet that Foles will keep the offense on the field more than the offense was able to stay on the field last year. I think Fournette will have more meaningful carries this year. I think Foles will have a better performance for Jacksonville running backs with respect to other teams. So I think that's a good thing. The receivers, I think Dede Westbrook, there's potential here. Marquise Lee, he's back off the PUP. There's potential there, but am I going to draft anybody with my fantasy draft? That draft capital, am I going to invest a pick in any of these Jacksonville receivers or tight ends? Honestly, no. I like Fournette, and that's about it. Everybody else, I'm looking for daily fantasy budget type plays, until proven otherwise. And I think in fantasy drafts, they have to pass the eye test, and I just haven't seen them pass the eye test, so I'm not going to make that investment in any Jacksonville receiver. Okay, so next game here is Cincinnati versus Washington. Look, Cincinnati, I've watched them. Last year, they were doing better than people realized they probably did early in the season, but then there were injuries that completely derailed everything. Well, this year, A.J. Green is out. So my question was, okay, Tyler Boyd, is he like a Juju Smith-Schuster of 2018? Is he somebody that can step up even if Antonio Brown or even if that wide receiver one is out of the offense? Early returns in preseason, I like what I see from Tyler Boyd. I actually moved him up in my rankings. I'm not going crazy with it, but I do like what I'm seeing. Dalton is a little bit more sharp. There's going to be a new offense here, new energy on that offense in the offensive scheme. I like Mixon. I actually love Mixon. I think the offense is going to be routed through him. When A.J. Green comes back, hopefully he's healthy when he does come back. This offense is going to be able to move the ball. I don't think that they're going to win a ton of games in the NFL, but I do think that there's going to be a lot of fantasy value in this roster. Just because Cincinnati is projected to not finish so well in the NFL, that doesn't mean that these players can't perform for your fantasy team. Mixon, I think, is a surefire first rounder. Boyd and A.J. Green right now are giving you good value because Boyd is a little bit, not tested, not battle tested, and A.J. Green is hurt. The question mark for me is what's going to happen at tight ends. We've seen in the past that when Eifert plays, he's really good. The problem is he just never plays. So we'll see what happens there. But I do like this Cincinnati offense and what we're seeing so far in training camp. Washington, oh my gosh, look, I don't mean any disrespect to Washington fans. I've rooted for Washington, I think, since basically I can remember watching football since the 80s, right? When they were still really good. Haskins, he's not a viable NFL starter this year. I've been saying that all year. The Grudens, both Jay and John, they don't like young quarterbacks. They want kind of grizzled veterans that don't turn the ball over. Haskins, I think he's got a very bright future. I just don't think he's starting much before like week 10. He might get some late season starts. I would say that, the odds are that he will start week 16, week 17, somewhere around there if he's not already. But, this to me is going to be Case Keenum or Colt McCoy until they are officially eliminated from the playoff chase. The offensive line, people forget this, the offensive line was hurt for the last 2 years. And I mean, the whole offensive line was hurt for 2 straight seasons. Trent Williams aside, which that's still a nasty situation, I think this team will be improved. Jay Gruden always has this team ready to play. They're going to be a tougher out than people think. But I think the value here is at running back and maybe Jordan Reed if he can stay healthy. I think Geis, assuming he wins the starting role, will be fine. Adrian Peterson looks in midseason form right now. I think he'll be fine. And people, came, in my opinion, incorrectly last year. They said Adrian Peterson really fell off because he was showing his age towards the end of the year. No, the offensive line was hurt. Like all 5 starters, they were signing guys who were working at Jiffy Lube and starting him like 3 days later. I mean, it's this injury situation was just awful. And again, for 2 straight years. So, Adrian Peterson started to fade basically when Alex Smith got hurt and the offensive line all got hurt at the same time. It's hard for a running back to put up good numbers when you're working with third stringers and, with backup quarterbacks and everything. So Adrian Peterson, if he had that whole, Alex Smith and the starting offensive line year round, I think he would have put up some serious numbers last last year, actually. Now, whether or not, what this snap distribution is going to be, that remains to be seen. But, keep an eye out for that. I do like the Redskins' ability to run the ball. I think they will be fine running the ball. I don't love the receivers, but I do like Jordan Reed and Vernon Davis at tight end if he needs something. So let's move it on. The next game from the weekend was Green Bay versus Baltimore. We still haven't seen Aaron Rodgers in the new offensive system. Aaron Jones is out. I am high on Aaron Jones. I think that Green Bay is going to commit to the run because Aaron Rodgers has a little bit, famously, I guess, reported he has less freedom at the line of scrimmage to audible in this system. I think Aaron Jones will actually have better numbers than projected. Devontae Adams, I'm fine with. I should say I'm more than fine with. I think he's going to be great. I haven't seen a lot of him this preseason either, and for good reason. Why do we need to see him? You remember a couple years ago, Jordy Nelson shredded his ACL in a non-contact drill. You don't need these guys, especially these studs out there playing a ton of snaps. You just don't need it. The backup running back, whoever is like the second or third receiver for Green Bay, I like. I like Geronimo. I like Valdez-Scantling. I like anybody there. Actually, Kumaro is starting to come on too. I've been impressed from what I've seen with him in camp. Whoever's on the field as a receiver there is going to have value in this offense. And don't forget about Jimmy Graham. I think this offense is going to utilize the tight end. We haven't seen a lot of it in the preseason, but I think that's by design. This is just my gut feeling. But I think, Green Bay is staying away from featuring, what they want to feature in the regular season. And Jimmy Graham could be a weapon in this offense more so than he was last year. The scheme has changed, and just keep that in mind. Now, Baltimore, look, they can run the ball. And, Ingram can run, Edwards can run, pretty much anybody who's taken snaps back there can run. And I like what I'm seeing in the pistol. I've said it all off season. The new offensive system there, Greg Roman, it's going to be great for Lamar Jackson. It's going to continue to his development. I think Lamar Jackson came out and he's displayed a better arm. And when I say better arm, not arm power, but accuracy, greater accuracy than I saw last season. I do think because Baltimore can run so effectively that it's going to open up windows, deep balls, intermediate routes, and Jackson can get it there. My only hesitation with Jackson is that he looks so skinny. I'm just worried that he might get injured. But if he can stay healthy all year with his ability to run and get you rushing touchdowns and rushing yards at the quarterback position, which is basically a bonus in most league formats, he could be a top 10 quarterback. He really could. So I like what I'm seeing from him in the development, and Baltimore's always good. And of course, the defense for Baltimore is going to be consistently strong as well. I know they lost some pieces in the offseason, but man, they're flying to the ball. They're just as fast as ever. I think they'll be just fine. Next game here on this list was the Jets versus the Falcons. The Jets, Darnold is looking better. I've heard a lot of hype, in the last couple of weeks about how Darnold, he's the youngest quarterback to start. He at the last 4 weeks of 2018, he was the best quarterback, yada, yada, yada. Look, I think Darnold has a very bright future. For this year, for fantasy purposes, I'm pumping the brakes. I do think Adam Gase is going to make him a lot better. Look, he took Tannehill and made him basically, kind of a fringe Pro Bowl talent. I don't think Tannehill ever actually started a game thanks to injury, but Tannehill took this team to the playoffs. Gase is going to be good for Darnold. If you're in a dynasty league and you have Darnold, you're in good hands. I just think there's better value at the quarterback position. So if you're a Jets fan, I get it. You're passionate. You want Darnold. And I think, he'll probably be a nice backup throughout the season and an occasional starter. But I see him as daily fantasy budget play early in the season. Cash in on him. At the running back position, we haven't seen Le'Veon Bell. My thing with Adam Gase is his running back, his usual MO, for play calling is to in personnel grouping is to rest the starting running back. I don't think Le'Veon Bell is going to get the same snap count distribution in New York that he did in Pittsburgh. So for that reason, I'm a little bit cooler on Le'Veon Bell than the rest of the fantasy world is. That's not to say if you've already drafted Le'Veon Bell, it's going to be a bad decision or a bad investment or anything like that. I just don't think he's going to be out, otherworldly like he was in Pittsburgh. He'll be very serviceable throughout the year. And serviceable is maybe probably not a good enough adjective to use, but he's going to be a good running back. But Ty Montgomery is going to have his say. Ty Montgomery has actually looked really good in training camp. He's a good if you're in a deep league with a lot of spots. He's a good handcuff to draft. So go ahead and keep an eye out for that. At the receiving position, I like Quincy Enunwa. Last year, early in the season, he and Darnold seemed to have great chemistry. Enunwa's kind of like that Pierre Garçon guy. He can run a fly route, but his value is really kind of possession receiver, those deep ins, those deep outs, and Darnold has the arm to get it there. I think Enunwa is actually the best receiver in this offense. Outside of that, I know the fantasy world's talking about Crowder. I know they're talking about Robbie Anderson, and Anunwa's going undrafted in a number of leagues. He's not going to go undrafted in my league. I can promise you that. I'm going to take him. I think, if you're in a PPR league, look, he might only get you 6-7 touchdowns or something like that, but I think he's going to have a lot of receptions. And just watch, when you see Darnold and Anunwa on the field at the same time, if there's a 3rd and long, there's like a 3rd and 10, Darnold is looking for Anunwa in those situations. He's not looking for Robbie Anderson. I don't think he's going to be looking for Herndon when he comes back from suspension or Crowder. I think he's looking for Anunwa, and I think Anunwa, is just somebody that's going to break out. So another daily fantasy early season buy for you if you play daily fantasy, and certainly a great sleeper, option for you. He's probably on your waivers if you've already drafted right now. I think he's a great one. So if you're thin at receiver, he's one you want to look at, and I'll give you one more later in the show here. Atlanta, Matt Ryan looked a little bit rusty, but I'm not worried about him at all. I'm really high on him this year with Dirk Cutter coming back. I just raised him in my rankings. But a Dirk Cutter system is always a little bit weaker at the running back position, so that means I'm not high on Devonta Freeman. I'm just not. I've been pretty consistent in that. I've been consistent in Cutter's history with Tampa. Everybody was talking about Jones last year. I said, pump the brakes, Ronald Jones. I like his talent, but he's playing in a Dirk Cutter system. They're going to spread the ball around among running backs, and I just don't see Devonta Freeman, reaching that that second round potential where he's being taken in some drafts right now. So I'm pumping the brakes there. But that also means that I love all of the receivers. Julio is way up there on my list right now. I think he's my number 2 receiver. I love Calvin Ridley right now. I think he's going to be great. Even whoever wins that third receiver battle, I'm sure it's probably going to be Mohamed Sanu again, but we'll see how that shakes out. I think he's going to be there. And I was curious to see what Austin Hooper would look like in training camp. It looks to me like he could be that Cameron Brate or that O.J. Howard type guy. Well, at preseason week 2, he looked fantastic again. His hands, it's just everything sticks to his hands. I think he's going to have a really big opportunity this year. So if you're kind of thin at tight end late in the draft and Hooper's still out there, he's worth the flyer, I think. Next game was Oakland at Arizona. We'll start with Oakland. Oakland, they're still kind of playing, a lot of the backups. I think we did get a little Derek Carr sighting. We finally got to see Josh Jacobs. I was suspect on Jacobs. He just looked slow to me in college film, but after seeing this game, I'm a lot more comfortable with where his average draft position is right now. I'm not in love with him. I think his hype machine has taken off a little bit too much right now. But, I'd be comfortable certainly having him and recommending him to anybody out there. The thing is, this Gruden system, if he can find a running back, and they're hoping it's Jacobs, and I think the fantasy world's hoping it's Jacobs too, if they can find a running back that can work in this system, it's going to be a top 10 running back. The offense gives that type of opportunity. It's whether or not Jacobs can really seize that opportunity. I still have this hesitation. I want to see him in the open field and how fast and does he have the ability to run away from defenders? Speed in pads versus speed like in a 40-yard dash, it's different. Jerry Rice didn't time well in the 40-yard dash, and we see how he played on the field, right? So I want to see this in the football field. We still haven't gotten a chance to see a ton of it, but like I said, I like Jacobs, and the opportunity is certainly there for him. So if you're an Oakland fan, or if you're just, hey, what is this offense going to be? Can I have a 3-down running back? He does give you that type of potential there. Receivers for Oakland, I don't know. Look, Antonio Brown's there. We've seen what's going on. I don't need to go into it. We'll go into it in the rest of the Functional Sportsaholic podcast and the Get Paid podcast. We don't need to go into that now, but look, Antonio Brown, his feet, that can be an issue. I'm sure he'll be okay. My big thing is, can Derek Carr force himself to throw the ball downfield? I kind of felt like he had a little bit of a mental blockade in actually throwing the ball deep last year. And that's Antonio Brown's game, man. He's just got to let it fly. There were a lot of times before they traded Amari Cooper where Cooper was kind of streaking free without anybody there, and Carr didn't throw his way. Well, Antonio Brown's the kind of receiver, he's got the talent that even if he's covered, you just still throw it to him. So I want to see Carr just get past that, get back to his form. I think it was like the 2016 or 2017 season before he broke his leg. Just throw the ball, just chuck it and put it up there. So, that's my hesitation there on Antonio Brown. But if Carr can kind of get there and just throw it up for grabs, I think this offense will definitely produce. And then the tight end there, I think it's Waller. Keep an eye out for him because this offense also likes tight ends. wins. We saw it last year with Jared Cook. Whoever the starter is there is going to have opportunity. I think it is Waller at this point, so keep an eye out for him, especially, again, if you're late in the draft and you've gone running back and wide receiver heavy and you need a tight end, he's a good one to grab for you. Now, from Arizona's point of view, look, everything is based on whether or not Kyler Murray can throw the ball downfield. Okay, so I'm going to keep this simple. David Johnson, I'm a little bit down on compared to the rest of the fantasy football world, just like I was last year, because I want to see what we have with Kyler Murray. Murray, to me, look, we know they're going to move the pocket. We know it's going to be a lot of quick throws. But the thing is, if Kyler Murray can't stand in the pocket and see over the offensive line and push the ball downfield, seam routes, post routes, fade route, whatever, fly routes, go routes. He's got to be able to stay in the pocket and throw the ball downfield, because if not, we're going to see what we saw in preseason week 2, where Oakland was just running up. They were playing a lot of bump and run coverage. They were bringing their coverage up. And what was happening was two things, right? One, first, that kind of like sprint left and throw left to the sideline stuff, that stuff kind of gets taken away. So what we saw was Murray kind of staying back there and throwing it. We know Murray has the arm, but he's got to convert these kind of down the middle and open up the middles of the field, because Oakland, like I said, was crashing in. They were bringing their guys up to the line of scrimmage. And what happens is, David Johnson, he's going to get a lot of receptions, but he's not going to have a lot of running room, because if they run the ball, everybody's congested there now. So Murray, once he gets to the point where he can kind of throw the ball downfield, and I think he's going to get there. I'm not throwing shade at the guy at all. I think it's just an evolution in his process, and I think he will get there. But is it going to be something that takes 8 weeks? Is it going to be ready by week 1? We need to see, but I'm going to be watching very closely in the 3rd week of training camp. Next game on the list is Buffalo versus Carolina. We haven't seen Cam yet. We haven't seen Christian McCaffrey. I think both will score well. I think Cam is one of those players, we talk about this on the Get Paid podcast. Cam is one of those players that if you're down on him, he gets a chip on his shoulder and he outperforms expectations. If you get too high on him, he kind of buys into the hype a little bit and doesn't meet expectations. So he always kind of does the opposite of what everybody thinks he's going to do. And everybody seems to be down on him. I see he dropped a ton in the NFL Network's top 100. I think he's going to come out with a chip on his shoulder, and I think he's going to have one of his best seasons this year. I really do. How far do I push him up in the draft board? Look, there's a lot of talent at quarterback, so I'm not going crazy, but he does get you that rushing bonus that I talk about with quarterbacks, so that's valuable. I think I've had him as high as number 4 on my quarterbacks list. I've moved him down. I think he might be in the 8 to 12 range right now. I can't really remember, but I do think he's going to be better than people think he's going to be. Christian McCaffrey, he's number 1 or 2 on my board, depending on format, depending on scoring, philosophies in the different leagues. He's going to be great. Don't need to worry about him. At receiver, I like Curtis Samuel more than I like DJ Moore. I think Samuel, he's just now starting to be talked about a little bit, but he's got that Percy Harvin slasher type skill set. You can run him, you can throw the ball to him. And DJ Moore, he's going to have to come on. Somebody's going to have to catch the ball for Carolina, so he's going to be there. Greg Olsen, I think, is also going to have nice potential, because, again, somebody's going to be catching these touchdown passes, and he and Cam Newton have great chemistry together. Buffalo. I was down on Buffalo to start the offseason, but every time I watch them play, I continue to be more impressed than I thought it would be. Here's what Buffalo's doing, right? Everybody came out last year and was like, oh, great, Buffalo has a new offensive coordinator, Brian Daboll. He's a college guy. He's from Alabama. That's not true. He's actually a New England Patriot, like lifer. He just happened to be at Alabama the year before he got hired in Buffalo. This is a team that wants to run a Patriots-like offense. I've known this for a couple years, but last year I was down on Josh Allen just because I thought he was too raw and he wasn't ready to start yet. Well, this year I kind of came into the season still thinking that Josh Allen had a big growth curve, but he's playing a lot better. This is his second year in the system. He's making throws in these preseason games against the ones that are the types of throws that he needs to make. But here's what I really like about the offense. We saw McCoy for the first time last week. They were on the passing downs. Of course, they were flaring McCoy out into the flat, and Allen was taking these short throws. Then they were taking Cole Beasley, and Cole Beasley was running these, Julian Edelman or Wes Welker type routes, these little out and curl arounds, or these, in and outs, and Josh Allen was taking those, 5 yards. Thank you very much. I'll take that, 2nd and 5 or 3rd and 3 situation. And when a quarterback who comes out with big arm type hype, what he did last year. He can throw the ball out of the stadium. Sometimes you don't see those kinds of quarterbacks willing to take these little dink and dunk type things. But what Buffalo's doing right now is they are trying to run that, and I think they're running it with success early in training camp. They are throwing the ball short. They're getting themselves into very favorable positions. They're able to run the ball with McCoy or with Gore in preseason week 1, and I like Devin Singletary, especially in dynasty formats. They're able to run the ball. And Josh Allen, if he can take these 5-yard completions like he has been, and he's been accurate, and he's been throwing a nice, kind of light, lobbed short pass, he's very nice. Well, what ends up happening is you get the tight end coming behind the linebackers, and they're hitting their tight end consistently in week 2. Then Allen throws one of the best deep balls in the game. He can still hit Zay Jones. He can still hit Brown. He can still hit his receivers deep. I think, especially early in the year for daily fantasy, I think Josh Allen's a great buy in daily fantasy. Josh Allen runs the ball, so you get the rushing bonus. I actually had to move Josh Allen up in my ranking significantly this. When I say significantly, he's kind of mid-tier for me. And I love Cole Beasley. I think Cole Beasley in this offense, remember, this is about offensive opportunity here. In this offense, Cole Beasley could put up like 80 to 100 catches. I'm not crazy. I promise you. I've been watching this develop. I always thought Cole Beasley was a little bit better than what he got out of that Dallas situation. He comes over here and they're trying to showcase him, and I think, damn it, I think he might actually be a good wide receiver. Between Beasley and Enunwa late in the draft, I'm probably going to draft a kicker a little bit early, draft a defense a little bit early, and just sit back and take Enunwa and Beasley with my last 2 picks, and wipe my hands. I have 2 nice, probably flexible, flex-worthy receivers there super late in the draft, and I'm going to go running back early because of that. So there's that second receiver sleeper for you. All right, moving on. We have, Tampa Bay and Miami. Miami, we didn't see a lot. I think Josh Rosen, I'm rambling on here. I'm going to kind of wrap this stuff up quickly. Josh Rosen, to me, looked better in week 2 than Fitzpatrick looked in week 1. I still think Rosen would benefit from a year on the bench. I really hope for his development that Fitzpatrick starts for most of the season, but we'll see. Drake is hurt. I liked Mark Walton, what I saw from him, but I don't think he passes Bellage or Drake in the depth chart there. Tampa Bay, the early returns are pretty good. I think this offense is going to be strong. I think Jameis Winston's still going to throw interceptions, but the Bruce Arians offense assumes that's going to happen. They're big about throwing the ball downfield. Hopefully as few interceptions as possible, but they're going to happen. I think this is the perfect offense for Winston, as I said last week, and I think it will go well for Chris Godwin. I liked what I'm seeing, by the way, from Peyton Barber. I think he's going to be a very viable running back. He's going late in drafts right now, so I think he can be fine with him. Ronald Jones is egregiously missing pass blocks. You can't do that if you're going to be a receiving running back. He has a nice skill set, but he's got to grow before I think he threatens Barber for much playing time. Moving on to Chicago versus the Giants. Chicago, they're not really playing a lot of the starters. We didn't even get David Montgomery, so there's just not a lot to talk about there this week for them. The Giants, of course, I'm high on Saquon Barkley. The receivers look pretty good. Manning looks a little bit better. I always thought that Pat Shurmur was a little underrated. I think he was fired a little too early in Cleveland. They went in another direction too early, got a bad rap. I think he's better than advertised as a head coach, and I think he will... Look, I don't think the Giants are going to win the division or anything, but I don't think they're going to be as easy to beat as other people think they will be. And I don't think Manning is necessarily going to give that starting job away without a fight. But Daniel Jones looks pretty good, man. He's making all the NFL throws that he has to make, and running that offense and going through his progressions and everything. Dynasty leagues, if you need a quarterback, he's one to take a look at. He might be starting by the end of the season, not because Manning's bad, but because he's just good, man. He looks really good. Next, Cleveland versus Indianapolis. Cleveland rested a bunch of their starters. I do think, though, that Nick Chubb is going to be a monster until Kareem Hunt comes back in Week 10. So, if you're drafting early in the first round, and you have like one of those like 4, 5, 6, 7 type picks. Chubb is a good one to take, in my opinion. No Andrew Luck, of course, but Marlon Mack played fantastic. I moved him up in my rankings. I think he's a 3-down back. He's the only running back, and this dates back to last year too. He's the only running back on that roster that when he's in the game, like the offense moves consistently. They just look, they're not going to take him off the field. I know Hines is going to get receptions. He'll be fine in PPR, but Marlon Mack, I think, is going to take off this season. You got the Patriots versus the Titans. New England, look, they started Hoyer. It didn't look great. Damian Harris, to me, is look, he has starlight capability. It's just a matter of, I really think that he is insurance for when James White comes up for contract. I think he and Sony Michel are going to be a nice 1-2 punch for years to come. Harris displayed great hands. He's a very talented running back. He's going to be fine. I don't think he's going to get a lot of playing time this year. So if you're in a redraft type format, I probably wouldn't take him. I'm not going to take him. But if you're in a dynasty league or keeper league, I like him quite a lot. Tennessee, no Henry, but Deion Lewis looked, he looked a little charged up playing his old team. He ran really well. He caught really well. I liked what I saw from Jeremy McNichols too. But the only problem is he's buried on the depth chart. I did like that Mariota was throwing the ball up for Corey Davis to try to make some plays. He's a little bit more aggressive, pushing the ball downfield. I did like that. But there's just so much better you can do at the quarterback position. So I'm not high on Mariota. Kansas City versus Pittsburgh. Kansas City, Hardman is returning punch, which is cool. I think Hardman, like I said last week, is kind of insurance against Tyreek Hill if Kansas City eventually has to part ways with him. But Hardman, man, he is fast. I think that Kansas City is going to have a lot of plays this year where Hardman and Hill are on the field at the same time. This is a very dynamic offense. If you're in a dynasty format, draft Hardman. I think he is the future there at the wide receiver position. But Tyreek Hill, I'm high on. He's now my number one wide receiver on the board. Mahomes did get the start. The offense looked a little bit rusty, but still powerful. And I do like Damian Williams more than higher than his draft position. I think Carlos Hyde. There's a lot talked about him. There's a lot talked about a committee. I just don't see it happen. I think Damian Williams is going to make that offense go. Everybody was just a little concerned and maybe a little frustrated with his hamstring injury, but if Damian Williams is healthy, I think he's going to be there. Now, Pittsburgh, there's no Roethlisberger, but James Conner looked fantastic. He's high on my board around that same area that I have Chubb in Cleveland with. James Washington was getting behind the defense in the early stages, including passes up the sideline. I think James Washington is going to pair nicely with Juju Smith-Schuster, so he's flying up my draft board at receiver as well. And Vance McDonald, I think, is going to get some of those targets. I think Antonio Brown had like 180 targets last year. Vance McDonald will take some of those away. Okay, next we have Detroit versus Houston. Detroit, no Stafford. Kerryon Johnson got the start. He looked good. He got basically I think C.J. Anderson came in as kind of like a third down running back. Look, C.J. Anderson looks a little bit big. I'm not big as in heavy. I'm not that concerned with him taking meaningful snaps away from Kerryon Johnson. I like Kerryon Johnson. I like him in the Bevel offensive system. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity. Remember, Bevel was the same play caller behind Adrian Peterson's early career. Marshawn Lynch's crazy awesome stat lines with Seattle. I think Kerryon Johnson is the next in that line. I think he's going to be a fantasy stud. For some reason, nobody else agrees with me at this point in the fantasy world. But look, if you can draft him in the third round where he's going, sometimes even in the fourth round, oh my gosh, cash in on that one for sure. And at daily fantasy, he's going to be less expensive. Buy him early and often, please. The buzz in camp is that Galladay's having a great camp. We haven't seen it in the preseason yet. But he's somebody that you can kind of stash. I just moved him up in my rankings as a result of that. And Houston, Lamar Miller didn't get the start. We haven't seen Duke Johnson yet. Watson did get the start. He looked pretty sharp. DeAndre Hopkins looks great as usual. I think this offense is going to be nice. I like Will Fuller. I like Kiki QT there. I don't love the tight ends for Houston, but we'll see. Dallas versus the Rams. Dak Prescott got the start, I believe. Pollard looked okay. Nobody's Zeke. Zeke's got to come back at this point, but Zeke has fallen because this holdout could last a long time, could get contentious. And if you draft Zeke in your league, you better make sure you get Pollard as well. Pollard, I think, has asserted himself. He can catch the ball. But remember, Pollard was the backup running back at Memphis last year. So let's keep this in context. He has talent, but I'm not super high on them. I am, however, higher and higher on Witten. Dak looks for him. I think he'll be good. For the Rams, they're not even playing their starters. Gurley is the big question there. I think Gurley is healthy, and I'm also not seeing anything from the backup running backs there that would worry me about Gurley's snaps being cut into significantly. I think what the Rams will do is probably give him more rest when the Rams take an early lead, maybe than they did last year. But at meaningful snaps, Gurley's still going to get them, I think. Let's see, a couple games left. left here. We have the Saints and the Chargers. The Saints' run defense looked as good as ever. Bridgewater might be the best backup quarterback in the league. I mean, he could very well end up being a starter in New Orleans after Breeze's time. I can't believe New Orleans is basically getting him for pennies on the dollar, but for all these quarterback-hungry teams. But everybody was afraid of Bridgewater's injury, and there you go. But Bridgewater looks nice there. So even if Breeze somehow went down, I think actually this team is in okay hands. Kamara looks great as usual. I think Latavius Murray is a little undervalued. He will get snaps running up the middle, short yardage type stuff. And that's about it. So the Chargers, Gordon is just going to be holding out, and I'm most worried about this situation because if I'm the Chargers, why would I pay Gordon? Like, I've seen the stats, it's great, but I think Eckler can do well. And this team still runs through Phillip Rivers. Mike Williams, haven't seen a ton of him in preseason, but he really looks physically imposing. We know that Allen's going to be fine there at receiver. I think Eckler could have a James Conner type impact. Like last year, Bell held out and Conner kind of stepped up. I think Eckler could do that same thing. I don't think he'll match Gordon's stats, but I think he'll be serviceable. And again, if you're somebody who drafted Gordon, make sure that you draft Eckler later in the draft. And even if you didn't draft Gordon, take him, because I think it's very, very, very conceivable that Eckler is the starter all year, just as Conner was last year in Pittsburgh. We have Seattle versus Minnesota. Seattle's Carson got the start. Penny was not a factor at all in the first team. Carson looked great. I think Carson will get a lot of runs, a lot of rushing yards, just like he did last year. People don't seem to respect him too much in fantasy circles. I remember I got laughed at when I ranked him well last year, and I probably will again this year for some reason, but the dude produces. I mean, it is what it is. Look at the numbers and look at the tape. He's good. Russell Wilson looks good. Lockett looks good. I'm curious to see, unfortunately DJ Metcalf got hurt. Jerron Brown looked fantastic, I thought. He was behind the defense. He was getting targets, and I think he looks good. Not really high in the tight ends there. Minnesota, Madison looks fantastic. I know Dalvin Cook's ahead of him, but if you're in a dynasty league, get Madison, because I think he might be one of the more talented running backs in the NFL. Honestly, I know he's buried, but he will be on the field. I can promise you that. And remember, Latavius Murray, even when Dalvin Cook was on the field last year, Latavius Murray was on the field. So Madison will be on the field too. Trust me, he will get snaps this year. And I know a lot has been said. Kubiak is there. I know the new emphasis in Minnesota about the running game. Well, yeah, they will emphasize that, but Cousins still did hit Thielen, a couple times. He looks good. They still have Thielen. They still have Diggs. Cousins will be good. Draft Cousins. Just don't play him on a nationally televised game, as we all know. And then lastly, we had San Francisco and Denver playing on Monday night. Garoppolo looked bad, but of course, he was rusty. I'm not reading too much into that. What I did take away from the game is Tevin Coleman looked really good, and anybody who's running back there is going to be strong. If it's a committee situation, that'd be kind of a bummer. Breida looked fine there too. He got some snaps with the first team. Garoppolo obviously needs to do better. So that's I wouldn't say a concern. I'm not really ready to panic yet, but we'll see in preseason week 3. I know he'll play more, so we'll be watching closely. And Denver, I think, is better than people think they're going to be. Remember, Fangio is the new coach there. He coached the Bears defense. Denver's defense is no slouch, man. They were good last year, and now they have a defensive guru coaching. Chubb is great. Miller is great. They cover well. This defense is going to be a really nice fantasy defense, and they're not being drafted particularly high. From the offensive point of view, Emmanuel Sanders, the fact that he came back from his injury and looks as good as he does is just phenomenal. I've moved Sanders up in my rankings as a result of that. He looks great. What else do we have? Phillip Lindsay. Whoever the running backs are in this system, they're going to be able to run the ball. It's a Shanahan-type system. In fact, the offensive coordinator spent, I think, last season with San Francisco. But the problem is Royce Freeman and Phillip Lindsay right now are splitting snaps a little bit with the first string. That concerns me. Phillip Lindsay to me is also a very talented. He's like a spark plug. I think he needs to get more snaps. I think he probably will at the end of the day get more snaps. But this carry distribution early in preseason, new offensive coach, personnel groupings, we have to get a feel for that. I like Phillip Lindsay, but I'm probably in line with where his average draft position is right now just because of the uncertainty. Flacco's looking pretty good. He can push the ball deep. Noah Fant, the rookie, I like him quite a bit. I think he's going to be a factor in this offense, and Sutton's going to be nice too. I still think Sanders is the top receiver there, in Denver, but Sutton and Fant are going to have something to say about that as well. So there you go. There's a lot of me talking about preseason week 2. You can check back. Once again, everybody, if you could subscribe, I would appreciate that. That is the name of the game here. And we'll be releasing a lot more content, and I'll be back next week talking about preseason week 3. Thanks.